Good afternoon. It is about 4, or I should say 3:33 here on a Sunday, on a nice fall day. Hope everyone's doing good. I yeah, I got to be out and about a little bit today. I went out of town, stayed at a friend's house last night, so it was nice to kind of um, out of get out of the space for a little bit and check out some new sites. So yeah, hope everyone's doing good. There's been some cool things happening. I'm gonna be doing a show pretty soon with my buddy Emmett Layler, so stay tuned for that. That's gonna be probably coming up maybe like next week sometime. So that will be really exciting. I just did a show on that I just posted today on the old Facebooks and on my Film Fanatic page. I just did a show on the new Hellraiser movie, which just came out, I guess, a couple weeks ago. So if you get a chance, check that video out. And I don't know, like usually for this channel, as probably most people know, besides listening to me talk about movies and ramble on about them and music stuff, I the most of the focus is always on, for the most part, older films, particularly 60s, 70s, and 80s. But I try to stay pretty current and I try to check out new stuff as much as I can. Um, I'm a big fan of new things that come out also, so I like to spotlight those kinds of films. I haven't been to the theater in a while. I'm a big fan of going to and having that experience. So usually I try to do a film. Usually when I cover those kinds of films, I try to do it based on like my first impression or like fresh. I try to do the video or the videos on these newer films. I try to do it in a fresh space, like meaning like I've just come out of the experience. So I like to try to, you know, focus on that way. I try to focus on the way I feel in the moment, especially when I, have first seen the film, so it's still kind of fresh. A lot of films, there's been, a ton of films that I might not have really liked at first. And then I've seen them maybe a couple times, and suddenly I'm like, wow, okay, I really like this. And then I, that's happened to me a bunch of times, but in a lot of those situations, the I start thinking about the first time had experienced the movie, whether I saw it in a theater or I, had bought it or saw it on DVD or whatnot or online. I kind of kick myself, like I'm like, what was I thinking? Like that movie was really great, and it could be a thing of where you're in a particular space, and you might be, kind of have this weird anticipation. One example of that, which just happened really recently, was this German horror movie I did a show on called Hazuzu, which came out actually a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But I bought it on a whim, with with knowing very little bit about it. I basically saw the cover, and I saw it on the display rack at Bull Moose, my favorite place that I always go to, and it was one of those films I kind of looked at here and there, and I realized it was like a newer film, and I'm like, that looks kind of interesting, but then I would keep, for some whatever reason, I would pass on it, and it was one of those films I just kept seeing in the aisle. So, and I actually looked at it a little bit more with a little bit more attention and saw that they had, basically some of these critics or people who gave reviews for the film were basically saying, they were comparing it very much to Robert Eggers' The Witch. And he's one of my favorite modern horror directors. And I've covered a lot of his films, on this channel. So I was like, okay, cool. That's not a bad thing. That's a pretty cool thing. And so, and it came out. I think it came out right around the time that The Witch came out. Maybe a year or two after, perhaps. I could be wrong. And it's a German foreign film, and it's essentially a story about, it's based on this witch and this woman who has this, who is like struggling with her relationship with her daughter, and it's mostly centered on the dynamic of a mother daughter relationship, not so much the witch, where the witch was basically centered on this idea of there being some unknown force, some kind of demonic force that dwells in this forest that this family is is kind of forced to move to, and it's about this family that is kind of being torn apart by this centralized character who you find out in a very surprising way who this woman is in the family, who is basically in league with this coven. And it has, even though that film is very original, and it very much reminds me of like The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's classic, because of the pacing. But it has, and it's not predictable, but it has some of those tropes of what you would expect for, to a degree, of a movie about, essentially about a witch, and the journey to discover who that person is. So I thought, okay, so I'm gonna, so getting back to the movie Haguzu, I I went ahead and I bought it, and I remember I watched it. I watched it, I don't know, a few days or so after I got it, and I kept thinking, okay, is this going to be a lot like Robert Eggers' The Witch, which is, a fantastic movie, and that's a movie too that's grown on me a lot over the years. I've seen it multiple times, and and I was thinking of The Witch the whole time. I kept thinking of that review for some reason. I couldn't just like separate it and put the movie in and just let it flow and let it let myself be absorbed by it. And it was weird. I had this like anticipation around it, and I, for about an hour or so into it, I couldn't really put my head around it. I couldn't really understand certain key points of the film. I couldn't really. I found myself not really investing in the film, so I was kind of disappointed. I thought visually it was pretty. The cinematography was pretty spectacular. I thought some of the acting was pretty interesting. I thought was very good, but there was very little dialogue. It was very slow, and I don't know. It felt like in a lot of ways it just didn't deliver the impact that I was expecting. So I ended up, and the other thing too is I ended up watching it on the later side, and it's kind of a long film. It's a slow burn film, but I ended up watching it on the later side of the nighttime. And I tend to watch movies, early evening, so I'm kind of fresh and I'm kind of, I can kind of have the energy to focus on something. I do watch films late, but generally, if it's a new film and I haven't seen it, I don't usually watch it late, super late, because I want to be more present and more focused. And sometimes I'll do that, and then I'll be into it right away. But then the next night or the next day, or usually the next night, I'll watch it again. Sometimes I'll go back a little bit, or sometimes I'll just watch it from the beginning. So, but anyway, so I was kind of disappointed with it. I wasn't really being pulled in by it. And then I just, I kind of took it out. I popped something else in, and right away I was like totally into that film, whatever that film was. And I kind of forgot about it. I was kind of disappointed because I had spent some money on it, and I was like, nah, it was a little bit, it was a little bit more expensive than I thought, than I probably would have, if if I knew a little bit more about the film, I felt a little bit bad about that. So I don't know. A few days later, maybe even I actually think a week later, I decided, well, you know what? I paid close to $20 for this, and it had some really cool things about it. So I need to give this another shot. I need to watch it all the way through and be a little bit more fair about that. So I ended up putting it in and watching it, and without any anticipation, I was like, that was not in my clouding my head as far as, oh, okay, this is going to be like The Witch, or this is going to be like this, or this is going to be like a classic gothic story about uh, this witch who is being prosecuted, or blah blah blah. I went into it totally cold, and I was fresh, and I watched it, and I was really kind of blown away by it. I had this totally unique and different experience from when I first put it in. And since then, I've like seen it. Uh, I've seen it about 3 times, and it's a tremendous movie. And it has nothing. It definitely has similarities to that film at times, but it's really different, and it's really hard to compare, um, it to that film in a lot of ways, because it's very different. It doesn't have this. It doesn't have the typical tropes that you would expect for a film about a witch. It's very different. It's kind of reserved, super creepy, super atmospheric. So after this experience where I watched it again and I found myself really digging it, I was just like, what the heck was I thinking? Like, that movie is really great. So since then, I've like recommended it to a few friends, and I posted about it. I posted a video about it and a review. So that kind of situation happens where that just there's other. I think the biggest there's definitely a host of variables of what causes that, but I think generally it's like, uh, if you've read something about it, or you have some kind of anticipation about the film where it's like weighing heavily on you, that can be good sometimes, but a lot of the times you have to go into it cold, so you just have the experience of checking it out and try not to, uh, I guess, pass a judgment on a film 10 minutes into it. So, but that happens. I mean, in the unique experience of when that doesn't happen, I feel like I can get a real solid understanding of what I watched if I just watch it cold without any anticipation, and to a degree kind of pretend that I don't know what this movie is. That's one of the reasons I try to stay away quite a bit from reviews. I do watch reviews, and but I try to be really 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 selective, and I try to maybe get a kernel of the synopsis of the story from if I watch a review. And there's a couple. One guy in particular that I do check out is Chris Stuckman. He's very good. He's pretty fair, and he's critical of things too, which I think is good. Uh, but generally, I hear of newer things or watch newer reviews through his channel. So if you ever get a chance, check out Chris Stuckman. He's pretty. He's one of the biggest YouTube guys on the web, and he is definitely probably the most popular guy. But he covers a lot of new stuff, which is great, and he covers a lot of horror films. And there's been a lot of films that I've gotten turned on from him by him. Two movies, that I really was floored by and I really love was X, which I really think is definitely one of the best, definitely one of the better, or the top 5 or so horror films that came out this year. And I remember a couple of years back, the other film that I really loved, and it was due to his show, was the remake of The Invisible Man. So, but generally I try to, just get a real gist, and then I'll turn off the thing because I try not to, I don't, I, there was a time years ago where I was a super uber movie nerd. I mean, I still am very much, probably more so now, but I was too much into. I used to, if a movie came out, like I used to have. This was back when magazines still kind of existed, and I used to have subscriptions to various magazines, and I used to have a regular subscription to Rolling Stone magazine, and I used to have a regular subscription to Entertainment Weekly. And Entertainment Weekly was a it still exists, I believe, but it was basically a movie entertainment magazine of their focus of it would be all new releases that were hitting the theater. That was back in the time when I would go. This was quite a few years back, and that was during the time when I would go to the movies all the time. I used to go to the movies probably every other weekend, or it was always a thing I would do. And I had a couple of friends or a couple of buddies that would always be down for doing that. And so I was going to movies all the time, and I was watching tons and I always loved older movies, but my focus for quite a few years was just checking out new stuff and new Marvel movies. Is when the Marvel movies were coming out, all the Avenger films, and then also a lot of newer horror films. So I was really steeped in checking out new things all the time. But I was so geeked up in that whole kind of, or if that's a word, but I was so much in this mind frame of everything, where if a movie was coming out, I would read as much as I could about it. I would read, all of the reviews. I would read negative reviews. I would read positive reviews. And I would go through this whole thing of where I would basically read everything I could about the movie before I would see it. And and it was cool and it was great, but I noticed after a while it was really affecting my judgment. And then it got to the point over the years I felt, like the way movies are marketed are very different now than they were, say, 10 years ago, where, like a lot of trailers that come out for films basically give away key points of the movie, and so they let out a lot of the surprises, and it's kind of terrible. So I noticed, from a marketing standpoint, there were more studios kind of putting out these longer trailers, and they would basically, you could really tell what the movie was going to be, just based on those 2 or 3 minutes. And it was due to, they were trying to market things more, but pull more people in because of the competition. And then the streaming thing was going on, had started, and it was really starting to catch fire. So they were really trying to, to do everything that they could to do that. But it also, I felt, cost the, or to a degree backfired for a lot of films, because there was quite a few films where you could really just tell, like, oh, okay, this is kind of what it is. This is like a condensed 2 or 3 hour version of the film. So I was, and when there's good trailers, it goes a long way, because it should be exciting and enticing and pull you in. But then you should, after you watch the trailer, you should, obviously, if it's a good trailer, it should like pull you in, and then you're left with questions, and you're like, wow, what the heck is that about? I don't really know what's going on, but it looks cool. It looks really interesting. So, but generally, I try to stay away from trailers altogether. I try to go into things more cold than I did before, and I found it's more rewarding as a fan, because you're going into it cold, and you don't have any preconceived notion of what it is. I did that with X and quite a few movies, and I went in not really even knowing what the movies were about, and it really added to the experience. So I just did a re-show on the new Hellraiser, and that was a film too. I did hear about it a lot because it was all over the place. A lot of people who were just fans of the franchise were chiming in, so it was kind of unavoidable to hear about it. And I had heard the big story about the new casting of Pinhead as a female lead, so that was a big thing. But I generally stayed away. I didn't see any of the trailers. I didn't see any of the reviews. So I went into it pretty cold, and I watched it like a few nights ago, and it was cool. Like I felt like I watched it in a place of not not in a state of mind of anticipating that this is going to be this or that, or so I felt like my my judgment and my feeling of the film was pretty sound. So, but anyway, so this film that I'm going to be doing is Dario Argento's Inferno. And Dario Argento, he is probably one of the most he's definitely easily, and he's still going. He's 82 years old. He just turned 82. So Dario Argento is definitely one of the most popular directors of all time. I think, and even in the world of Italian cinema, the Italian horror exploitation world, and all of the giallo films that have come out, he, I think it's pretty safe to say that Dario Argento is probably the most popular in a lot of ways. Um, and he's also one of the most influential. I found too, like, even if you're not aware of, say, all of the amazing Italian directors that were putting out films in the 60s or 70s and 80s, you probably know, if you like horror films, you probably know Dario Argento. He's most well known for Suspiria, which is one of the greatest films ever made. And he's known for the giallo style, where there's a lot of suspense. There's a little bit of sex exploitation. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue in a lot of his films. There's lots of layers. The lighting for his films is typically just out of bounds, like amazing. The violence in his films, they're like these big art pieces in a lot of ways, the way they're shot and put together. So he's mostly known for doing that, where he blends like this giallo thing, where it's not straight horror, but it's definitely a horror film, But he has all these elements of horror and violence and gore, but there's the giallo thing, where there's like it's a mystery, there's a suspenseful thread throughout the film. It might have some like of the sex exploitation kind of vibe to it. It might have like an investigative, like it could be a crime film. Um, so it blends like various different styles, but within the genre, it's not always pure horror, um, but for the most part, I would say yeah. Like you could take people who are into horror films, that people who love like say John Carpenter or Wes Craven, even if they're not aware of the whole like Italian explosion that happened in this, during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they probably know who Dario Argento is, and that's mostly due to Suspiria. I'm a huge Dario Argento fan. I mean, he's like one of the greatest filmmakers ever. My favorite, I mean, it's so hard to say, but my favorite Italian director is Lucio Fulci, probably overall. But Dario Argento is such a master, or is such a master. One of the things and unfortunately, I don't have many of his films on Blu-ray, which really sucks, and I'm slowly buying more of them. But the thing that I've found, and that I find that happens a lot, there's when I go to Blumhouse and lots of places to buy uh, these great, fantastic exploitation movies, they're uh, the demand for his films on Blu-ray and 4K is like through the roof. You have multiple companies that are putting out his work, like Blue Underground, Severin, um, Vinegar Syndrome. There's a whole bunch of companies, but they basically have put out all of his work. But there's such a demand for his work that a lot of his films, which I need to get and I will get, and I've seen quite a few of them, but there's a lot I haven't seen. Um, because the demand, I think it's attributed to his demand as a filmmaker, and seeing his films, because he's known for his. I mean, he's got like this visual sense that's unlike any other director. It's so powerful. Uh, it's such a distinct kind of look too. It always reminds me, even though his style is totally different, but it has such a distinct flavor that it reminds me of, like, if you put in a Stanley Kubrick film, automatically, even though it could be a movie about war, it could be a horror film, or it could be something like Clockwork Orange. You just know right away that you're in for an experience, and it just has this look and this feel that it's a Stanley Kubrick film. And the same thing with Dario Argento. I feel like he really has. a very particular look, and the scope and the size of his films is always just, amazing and gorgeous, and like this, in this like sweeping kind of level. And so he's like that kind of a guy. And but I've seen like a lot of his films in on Blu-ray in a lot of the stores. They have most of his stuff available. But a lot what I find is a lot of the stuff is like $30 and up. Like a lot of the films are very expensive. I remember seeing a copy, I believe, for Suspiria, which was like a newer edition that was like $38, $40. So it's his stuff is very expensive, and so I've been looking for his films, and I see them all the time. I'm waiting for some of the prices to maybe drop a little bit, but I'll eventually buy some more. So I got this one, which I think I do believe I did see, but it was many many years ago, and I got this one, Inferno, which came out. This came out. This was his follow up to Suspiria, and I got this on Blu-ray, and it's pretty spectacular. I was pretty psyched because the price was amazing, and it's got all these great interviews with the whole cast and people who worked on the film. It came out in 1980, and basically the story of it. It's definitely a giallo film, but it's very very gory. It's very suspenseful. Basically, the story of it is centered on this character who's Rose Elliott, a young poet in Rome, and she's murdered after she reads a Latin book that tells the supernatural story of the three mothers. The whole movie is kind of centered on these characters, or these houses that are called the three mothers, that were built by these alchemists, which is so really interesting. Her brother Mark investigates the murder, and after his friend Sarah is killed, he heads to New York to further the investigation. And basically, the whole story, it's a very mysterious movie, but it's just amazing. It's basically centered on these scientists who are alchemists, and they blend, different elements of the occult in their studies, and they build these houses that host these, or they can basically, because of their architecture, they can basically harness this power, and that there is this evil kind of life form or life force that lives in some of these three houses, and it can really, it can, if a person goes to it or tries to investigate, it will basically capture them. And it's a great film, but it's kind of an epic film. It's like on this huge scale. The Blu-ray transfer of this is just amazing. It came out in 1980. It was like a few years after Suspiria, and there's a cool interview with Dario Argento on it where he talks about how he felt this film was technically the hardest film for him to make, which I felt was really surprising. Thought was surprising for him to hear him say that, because Suspiria is such a huge, that the scale of that film is just monstrous. But this film really has this. These set pieces are just the set pieces alone are just amazing. And but he said in an interview that the Inferno was like technically the hardest film for him to make, and it's a complex story. It has a lot of layers, and it has these action scenes that are just the scope of them are just amazing, kind of jaw dropping, and the kills are great, super creepy, it's a great like character study of these people that are trying to investigate the three mothers, these buildings, and it has really great like giallo kind of vibe, but then it's got all of these really awesome horror elements, slasher elements. Very cool movie, very very cool, and very supernatural too. But yeah, the Blu-ray, the quality of this on Blu-ray is just unbelievable, and it's got some fantastic interviews, and so you know he's one of my favorite directors. He's one of the greatest guys, but I feel pathetic that I don't have barely any of his films on Blu-ray. But that's gonna eventually change. This one I lucked out. I got a really great price on it. So as far as Italian directors, like I've been getting a lot of Lucio Fulci's movies. Prices are really good for his films, and they're really great packages. So, but yeah, get a chance. I mean, Dario Argento, you can't go wrong with anything really. But if you get a chance, check out Inferno. It's an amazing film. It's kind of like I feel like his films they're definitely horror films, but they're kind of like art house films. They're just I think a lot of people would I think I think a lot of people, if they haven't been exposed to his films that are not necessarily into horror films, or they don't like, say, slasher films or gore, like very gory films or violent films, if they're into, other things, I think the way these films are shot and the way they're put together, they're just gorgeous. And I feel like these would really they could cross over to an audience that is not necessarily into horror, because I feel like these are almost like art pieces, and almost in the under the umbrella of like an art house film, like a foreign art house film. But this is Jason Dean, so if you get a chance, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and yeah, Dario Argento, he's the man. So over time I'll be getting some more of his films, and I look forward to doing some more reviews. So we'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.